Hello and welcome. Regularly in the list of the world's most beautiful people, she was even the most highly paid in her profession in the 1980s. But her life story is a complex one that reveals the many challenges she faced from an early age. This week on 101, meet the talented actress, writer and supermodel Paulina Porizkova. The East-West divide felt the strength of the Iron Curtain at the time she was born in what was then Czechoslovakia. Paulina Porizkova's parents fled the Warsaw-Pact country, leaving the youngster with her grandmother in the hope of bringing her to their new home in Sweden later. But the struggle was a long and politically tough one and was even featured in the Swedish press. Once she finally reached the West, it didn't take long for her beauty to be recognized by the renowned elite modeling agency, and she was soon on the covers of high-profile magazines such as Sports Illustrated and Playboy. Over the years, her quick wit and sharp intellect gained her much respect and had Porizkova trying her hand at a number of challenging tasks, from acting to writing, something she still enjoys, often through her internet blogging. Paulina, great to have some time with you. Thank you.
Thank you.
Now, of course, you know, you've been described as one of the most beautiful women in the world by so many magazines, Harper's Bazaar, all these. How, when there's that much accolade, how do you stay grounded?
First of all, I think that I was really fortunate because when I was growing up, I was seen as ugly. I was called the ugly kid in school. When I was a teenager, I couldn't get a date if I pulled out a gun. Maybe if I pulled out a gun, but I didn't have one available. So I was sort of used to being the ugly kid, and so I studied history and played classical piano and thought, well, at least I'm smart. I will work my mind. I will become a professor, and that will be my path in life. So to be picked out as a model, then going to Paris, and then suddenly being lauded as beautiful, just beautiful, not the most beautiful, beautiful to me was a shock. I sort of went, well, how do you figure that? Because back there, like a day ago, I was ugly, and here I'm beautiful. So I think what it taught me was don't believe either one.
Well, you seem to be pragmatic about aging, and that's kind of very refreshing, actually, especially when it comes to issues like cosmetic surgery. You're outspoken, especially about how horrible the results can be. And you see, as you travel, of course, and you're in an industry where people feel very, very pressured. Why do you think they take it to such extremes?
Well, I think, the obvious one is, we're all afraid of death, and aging means that we're getting closer to death, and so, you want to skip that part and you want to hold on to youth as long as possible. I actually personally think that it has a bit to do with control, that because we can control the way we look, how we age looking-wise, that not using that control, not exercising that control is sort of, it's like turning up your nose at technology or, or medicine or, available things. And so I think kind of becomes like, it's like if you don't dye your hair and you let it go gray, it's sort of like you've given up.
So when you are that candid and honest, how do the people you know in the industry react? Especially it's a bit of a jab at the industry.
I don't think I'm very popular in the industry, honestly.
You have a wonderful story. Your childhood story is quite remarkable. You were born in what was then Czechoslovakia, and at the age of 3, your parents left as the Soviet Union invaded, and ended up in Sweden. But they didn't take you. They left you with your grandmother in the hope of taking you, getting you out later. But it all went horribly wrong, didn't it? Take me through what happened.
Well, they got to Sweden, and the Russians had come in. They had closed off the borders, and then I couldn't go out, and they couldn't come back in. And so I think my parents were very young. I think my mother was 21, my dad was 24. And they were very good looking and photogenic, and somehow they've sort of discovered the power of the press. And in Sweden, they sort of started using the newspapers and television. They did a hunger strike in Stockholm, and I think that's how they got the attention of the press. And then they sort of tried to use that to get me out of the Czech Republic. And but the borders were closed, and there was no way that it was going to work. So this actually carried on for quite a few years. Until my mother, I was 6. They left when I was 3, and then this situation happened when I was 6. My parents got a letter from the Czechoslovakian authorities saying that unless they come to claim me, I will be adopted to a suitable family for communistic upbringing, etc. So their choice was to go back and be put in jail and not see me, or not go back and never see me. So not ideal situation. And then they, again, because they had used the Swedish press, the press was now sort of behind them, backing them, and they paid for an expedition to go to the Czech Republic, Czechoslovakia. Mm-hmm. My mother had a false passport, she had a wig, she was pretending she was this pilot's wife, and these two Swedish pilots that were sort of adventurers that took it on to go and kidnap me on my way to or from school. And they were going to kidnap me and just, drive me to the plane, take off, and go to Sweden. And that, of course, went horribly awry, as any good story should. They were busted for speeding. They got down fine in the airport. They're driving to the town where I lived, and they got busted for speeding. Taken into the police station, interrogated, found out my mother wasn't who she claimed she was, blah-de-blah-de-blah, and then they got all put into jail. And my mother was 6 months pregnant with my baby brother. Fortunately, at this point, the Swedish press had been sort of following the story, sort of like, the story of the year. Oh, what's going to happen to this poor family? And so they were right on top of it when my mother got arrested. And so the Czech authorities let my mother go. And, well, they gave her amnesty. So she was allowed to she was under house arrest in my grandmother's house for.
And that's where your brother Joachim was born, yeah?
Exactly. And so she was in house arrest for 3 years, and then it sort of all ended up with the Swedes just didn't give up on us. Thank you, Swedes.
And it was Olof Palme as well, the late Prime Minister.
And Olof Palme somehow he got involved in saying that he wouldn't make a state's visit to the Czech Republic unless they released us. The Swedish hockey team wouldn't play the Czechs in the Olympics unless they released us. So they released us.
How did you adjust to Sweden once you got there after all this experience? Well,
that was sort of not the really happy time of my life. And that, I was a kid. I was 9, 10 years old when we went to Sweden, and I didn't know that I was never going to come back home to what was my home in the Czech Republic. And my grandmother, who had raised me, who was actually like my mom. My mom, to me, I thought she looked like Marilyn Monroe, and she was just this cool stranger. I didn't think she was my mother. So to go away with this strange, pretty lady to a country that I couldn't speak the language, and my father, who I didn't know, I just had very vague memories of him, and then, sort of arrive and then be a famous political refugee is not really something that's all that hip when you're 11 in school, and the teachers come by and go, "Oh, poor little Paulina, are you doing okay?" And all the kids are communist kid.
Not easy. Now, sadly, your parents divorced soon after you got to Sweden as well, and your mother had quite a tough time bringing you and your brother up. Do you recall, apart from the tough stuff at school, do you recall the hardship she faced?
I do recall, because the hardship that my mother had to face sort of showed itself by her having sort of nervous breakdowns and taking it out on me, because I was the only person available. Not the greatest parenting skill. So basically, I ended up alone, 10 years old, taking care of my 3-year-old brother. My mother had to work all day to make money. My dad didn't want to pay for child support. And then she went to school at night. So I didn't see her very much. And I had to suddenly I was sort of thrown into cook dinner, clean the bathrooms, clean the house, learn Swedish, and do your homework. And that was not the best time of my life.
And you've been estranged from your father since as well.
Yeah, my father's an interesting man.
Like mine. But in terms of how it affected you growing up in that kind of environment, how do you think, what lessons did you pick up, and what baggage do you think you've had to carry?
Whenever you have a really hard time, it's really a gift in disguise, because that's how you learn. And I feel like I learned so much from my childhood on how to count on myself, how to sort of values and priorities that I had to learn very young. And I think then when I was thrown into the fashion jungle at 15, I was fine. I could see all the pitfalls and I could spot the dangers, because I had already been bringing up a child for 5 years and you know, run a house, and sometimes I had to steal food because we didn't have enough money. And I knew how to take care of myself and a small child.
It sounds like very much a lost childhood, though, for you.
Yeah, it was a lost childhood, unfortunately. I didn't have much of one. Well, at least not from 10 and on.
Now, you know, obviously things did start to change, but was there that phase before you got into the modeling business where things did improve, or was it pretty much tough until you got the break?
Well, once my mom married who we called Dad 2, things got easier for the year she was with him. Then she divorced him and went off with Dad 3, who wasn't very dad-like at all. But whenever she, well, things got easier when she was a single parent, let's put it that way, when you had one more person to sort of help out. But to me, it was a real relief when I went to Paris at 15 to be by myself. Was scary, and I did sort of develop these anxiety attacks, panic attacks that I have been having ever since, that are maybe not all that much fun, but again, it was, I'm not sure, maybe, I think it wasn't such a big price to pay for all the good that I've gotten out of it.
And you did, you turned it around. I'm going to get onto that in just a moment. We have more one-on-one with Paulina Porizkova in just a moment. Welcome back. You're watching One-on-One. We're speaking with supermodel and actress Paulina Porizkova. Now, in 1980, it did all turn around, and it was sort of by accident, I gather, that you had a friend who was a photographer and wanted to try and get her pictures recognized by the elite modeling agency, but they spotted you. How did they get in touch?
Yeah, well, actually, it wasn't so much elite modeling agency. It was just it was an agent, you know, one of those scouts that agencies have scouts that look for girls, and then I think they get paid a percentage or something, or some money too, if the girl becomes a model. So it was a scout, and my girlfriend found a scout, and she sent her pictures to find out whether, you know, she had a future as a fashion photographer. And the scout called her back and said, yeah, photography's fine. Who's the girl? How tall is she? How old is she? And I was in Paris probably about 2 months later.
Now, apparently you had a very bad attitude when you first started modeling.
Who says?
All this swearing and smoking. Well, at least you gave up the smoking.
I was swearing and smoking, but I don't consider that a bad attitude. A bad attitude is not showing up on time and wasting other people's time. That I never did. I was very professional. I took very seriously the amount of money that people were paying me for looking pretty. So I was not a diva, and I didn't have a bad attitude. I was just a punk. I was a kid.
How quickly did things change? How quickly did the career pick up? I mean, was it something you could actually track, that things were moving quickly?
You know what? Again, I was incredibly fortunate, and my story is, you know, one of those 1 in a million stories, because my career took off pretty much right away. I didn't really have to suffer. I didn't have to pound the pavement, and I didn't have to bang on doors, and I didn't have to sleep with anybody to get anywhere. So I started working pretty much right away, mostly junior sort of stuff, you know, at 15, and a lot of wedding dresses, which now in retrospect I think, really, at 15, wedding dresses. Well, anyway.
And you look mature.
No, I looked 15, but, you know, I guess the innocent virginal look, that was me.
Your appearance on the cover of Sports Illustrated in 1983 really put you on the map as far as America was concerned. You'd already made quite a big name for yourself as a model in Europe. And while you were 17, you were already dabbling into movies, and you were in the film Portfolio, which was like a documentary type movie, yeah?
Portfolio was more like a joke, actually. It was more like a very expensive commercial for elite agency, and I just, you know, they just threw in all the models that they had, including me. And
you dabbled a bit, though, in film after that. You started to get...
Well, that I wouldn't call dabbling. I did, however, I've actually been in 16 movies, and I wouldn't call it dabbling. I think I was actually quite good.
I meant in those early years.
No, that was the only so-called dabble. Okay. You know, it was just a crap.
You actually produced and directed one too.
I did.
Roommates.
Yeah, it was written much better than it was directed.
Now, actually, later on, you turned down the chance in 1995 to be a Bond girl in GoldenEye. which is quite a big decision to make, actually, considering the status, status and at least the profile that's involved. Why did you make that choice?
Well, at the time, I wanted to be an actress. I didn't want to be a model who is in movies. And that I thought, well, that would sort of seal my fate as just being, the pretty chick in movies. And I was taking myself very seriously. It's too bad nobody else did.
But then you had done the cover of Playboy in 1987.
Fully dressed.
But I was going to say, it wasn't about any nude shots. It was about your calendar.
It was about my calendar, which I had produced myself, and it was all just bathing suits. It was probably the lamest Playboy spread ever done because it didn't even show anything. But, it was very nice of them to publish it anyway. She's like, sure, great, give me the extra publicity.
But your brand grew, and in 1988 you got the biggest ever modeling contract at that time, $6 million. I hope you spent it wisely.
Spending. Those careers don't last very long. You got to keep that money because otherwise I wouldn't have anything to live on.
Well, it was an Estee Lauder contract, and of course that really changed your brand as well. It made you, took you beyond being a swimsuit model to being really a sort of European sophisticate. Did you sense that change? How did you relate to that kind of...
Well, it was really quite funny because I, of course, thought of myself as the European sophisticate all along. As I was doing the bathing suits, I couldn't figure out why anybody wanted to see me in a bathing suit because I didn't think I had such a great body, but I was pretty good at faking it. And I think that what I wanted to be known as when I started sort of acquiring a bit of a name and a brand was to be the model that had a brain, that did read, that wasn't sort of just going, oh, I love everybody I work with and I get to travel the world, because I thought that was, excruciatingly dull. So I sort of made a big fuss about being sort of the anti-model, the anti, this is swearing.
You're punk again.
Yeah, exactly, quoting Dostoevsky, and, I thought that was really, that would make me look really intelligent. Of course, it didn't, but that didn't dawn on me until much later. So when Estee Lauder, they weren't the only people that were looking into sort of signing me up for a contract for a while. But they had a very sophisticated look and a little old. It was at the time it was a little fuddy-duddy actually. So I think they wanted me to sort of refresh it a bit, and they liked the way I looked. Like I looked right, but I didn't talk right. So once we got into a contract together, it was a little bit of a issue. The wrong partners got married, They liked the way I looked, but not really who I was. And I had some serious issues with that.
Now, actually, when it comes to marriage, you, unlike your mother, is the way you were describing her, your marriage from 1989 to Rick Ocasek, is that how you say the last name?
Yeah, Ocasek or Kasich.
He was the lead singer of the Cars. That's survived. I mean, the pressures of both being in the media and being in the limelight. What's the secret to that, do you think?
Well, first of all, finding the right person, which is much harder than it sounds. I think I just really got lucky, and so did he. But we're really good at communicating. He's sort of a very female man, and I mean that in a very as a high compliment, because he's somebody who communicates and who dares to be sensitive. And I've always been a sucker for men like that.
Yes, word, sensitive.
Yes, I would pick the sensitive guy always. He had already had a sort of a giant career before he met me, and he was sort of at the pinnacle when we met. And he had done all the touring and the groupies and all the craziness of rock and roll. And I think, it was time. It was the right time, the right place.
You weren't bothered by that history?
No, it was. I wasn't exactly a saint myself.
So it seems. Now, after you had your first child, you actually pulled back a little bit from the modelling, and I wondered, pulling back from such a high-profile career, did you miss it, the hustle and bustle?
You know what? I never missed modeling. Modeling to me was always. As a matter of fact, and I know it sounds terrible because there's so many people who would love nothing better than to be able to be models, and I know it's incredibly fortunate and lucky to be in a position to be one. But after you know, having done it for 15 years, I would actually get physically sick when I had to go to work. But it just got to me. I really, really didn't want to do it anymore.
Well, you were writing a little bit of, you co-authored The Adventures of Ralphie and the Roach?
Ralphie the Roach,
Ralphie
yes. It's
the
about
Roach.
a cockroach in New York City, yes. My very first attempt at literature. And I wrote a novel.
And your stepson Adam illustrated it, I gather.
Yes, my stepson Adam, he's a brilliant artist. I have a lot of brilliant relatives, actually. Yeah, and then I wrote my novel, and that was really the sort of the accomplishment that I'm probably the most proud of to date.
Your novel, A Model Summer, was about the modeling industry. It was based on that theme. Looking back on that, was there a message you were trying to get out?
My message was, I just really wanted to, with words, describe what it felt like to be 15 and to be in this world where, you know, sexual molestation is seen as a compliment. You know, things that if you heard it in Oprah, you know, it would seem shocking and outrageous, but in 1980 and in my life, this was just, you know, run-of-the-mill kind of a day. And I wanted to let little girls know how fabulous the modeling world really was.
It's interesting, you know, I'd said that you had a remarkable story at the beginning, and it really is as it's unfolded. And I wonder, considering the people you've met and the things you've been through, who have been your mentors? Who's guided you in a positive way?
My husband. And I think out over my husband, perhaps Monique Pillard, who was a co-owner of Elite at some point. She was sort of the one that looked after me.
And you've done a lot. I mean, you talked about books, movies, and surviving the modeling industry. Is there anything on a list that you have, you know, that you'd like to achieve? Is there anything you haven't been able to get to yet, which you really want to?
Well, I would have liked to have been in movies successfully. That would have been nice. I would have liked to have written a bestseller. That would be nice too. So those are still up. Mm-hmm. Yeah, you never know. You never know.
What would you like to be remembered for, though? What would you like your legacy to be?
2 very happy, healthy, well-adjusted young men. Really, that's. I mean, once you have children, you know, your legacy is that. How good of a job did you do on your kids? And I think so far they look pretty good, and they will make some girl or boy happy one day. And I would. Well, it would also be nice if I got to write something that meant something to somebody. Oh, that's really general.
I don't think there's going to be any stopping you. Paulina, thank you so much for sharing your story.
You're very welcome.
It's a pleasure. Thank you.
Thank you.